Hello, folks. Welcome back to the AA Big Book Stories. I'm your host, Jason. Jason D. Today's video is brought to you by James 414 Vape Sales. That's James 414 Vape Sales. They're out of Mount Vernon, Kentucky. And if you want, you guys can check them out. If you're through there, I know they have a Facebook page. With that, let's just jump into it. Today, we're on story number 13 of part 2 of the stories in the back of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. This one is Me, an Alcoholic? Alcohol's ringer squeezed this author, but he escaped quite whole. When I tried to reconstruct my life, what my life was like before, I see a coin with two faces. On one side, I turn to myself and the world as respectable, even in some ways distinguished. I was a father, husband, taxpayer, homeowner. I was a clubman, athlete, artist, musician, author, editor, aircraft pilot, and world traveler. I was listed in Who's Who in America, and as an American who by distinguished achievement had arrived. The other side of the coin was sinister, baffling, and I was inwardly unhappy most of the time. There would be times when the life of respectability and achievement seemed insufferably dull. I had to break out. This I would do by going completely bohemian for a night, getting drunk, and rolling home with the dawn. Next day remorse would be on me like a tiger. I'd claw my way back to respectability and stay there until the inevitable next time. The insidiousness of alcohol and its is an appalling thing. In all the 25 years of my drinking, there were only a few occasions when I took the morning drink. My binges were one-night stands only. Once or twice during my early drinkings, I carried it over into the second day, and only once that I can remember did it continue into the third. I was never drunk on the job, never missed a day's work, and seldom rendered totally ineffective by a hangover, and kept my liquor expenses well within my adequate budget. I continued to advance in my chosen field. How could such a man possibly be called an alcoholic? Whatever the root of my unhappiness might turn out to be, I thought it could not possibly be booze. Of course I drank. Everyone did in the set which I regarded as the apex of civilization. My wife loved to drink, and we tied on many a hooter in the name of marital bliss. My associates, and all the wits and literary lights that I so much admired also drank. Evening cocktails were as standard as morning coffee, and I suppose my average daily consumption ran a little more or less than a pint. Even on my rare at first binge nights, it never ran much over a quart. How easy it was in the beginning to forget those binges ever happened. After a day or two of groveling remorse, I'd come up with explanations. The nervous tension had piled up and just had to spill over. Or my physical plant had gotten a little run down and the stuff rushed right to my head. Or I got to talking and forgot how many I was taking and it hit me. Always we emerged with a new formula avoiding future trouble. We got to space out your drinks, take plenty of water in between, or coat your stomach with a little olive oil, or drink anything but those damn martinis. Weeks would go by without future trouble, and I'd be assured at last I'd hit on the right formula. The binge had just been one of those things. After a month, it seemed unlikely that it happened. Intervals in between binges were 8 months. My growing inward unhappiness was a very real thing. However, and I knew that something would have to be done about it, a friend had found help in psychoanalysis. After a particularly ugly one-nighter, my wife suggested it, and I try it. I agreed. Educated child of the scientific age that I was, I had complete faith in science of the mind. It would be a sure cure and also an adventure. How exciting to learn the inward mysteries that governed the behavior of people. How wonderful to know at last all about myself. To cut a long story short, I spent 7 years and $10,000 in my psychiatric adventure and emerged in worse condition than ever. To be sure, I learned many fascinating things, many things that would prove helpful later. I learned what a devastating effect it can have on a child to coddle him and build him up and then turn around and beat him savagely as it had happened to me. Meanwhile, I was getting worse, both in regards as my inward misery and my drinking. My daily alcoholic consumption remained about the same through all this, with perhaps a slight increase with binges remained, and my binges remained one-nighters, but they were occurring with alarming frequency. In 7 years, the intervals in between them decreased from 8 months to 10 days, and they were growing uglier. One night I barely made my downtown club. If I had to go another 50 feet, I would have collapsed in the gutter. On another occasion I arrived home covered in blood. I deliberately smashed a window. With all this, it was becoming increasingly hard to maintain my front of distinction and respectability to the world. My personality was stretched, almost splitting in effort. Schizophrenia stared me right in the face, and one night I was in suicidal despair. My professional life looked fine on the surface. I was now head of a publishing adventure in which nearly $1 million had been invested. My opinions were quoted in Time and Newsweek along with pictures. I addressed the public by radio and TV. It was a fascinating structure. It was a fantastic structure. Built on a crumbling foundation, it was teetering and it had to fall. It did. After my last binge, I came home and smashed my dining room furniture to splinters, kicked out 6 windows and 2 balustrades. When I woke up sober, my handiwork confronted me. It was impossible for me to reproduce my despair. I had an absolute faith in science, and only in science. Knowledge is power, I had always been taught. Now I had to face up to the fact that knowledge of this sort, applied to my individual case, was not power. Science could take my mind apart expertly, but it couldn't seem to put it back together again. I crawled back to my analyst, not so much because I had faith in him, but because I had nowhere else to turn. After talking to him for a time, I heard myself saying, "Doc, I think I'm an alcoholic." "Yes," he said surprisingly, "you are. Then why in God's name haven't you told me so during all these years?" "2 reasons," he said. "First, I couldn't be sure. The line between heavy drinker and alcoholic is not always clear. It wasn't until just lately that in your case I could draw it. Second, you wouldn't have believed me even if I had told you." I had to admit to myself he was right. Only through being beaten down by my own misery would I have ever accepted the term alcoholic as applied to myself. Now, however, I accepted it fully. I knew from my general readings that alcoholism was an irreversible and fatal. And I knew that somewhere along the line I'd lost the power to stop drinking. "Well, Doc," I said, "what are we going to do?" "There's nothing I can do," he said, "and nothing medicine can do. However, I've heard of an organization called Alcoholics Anonymous that has had some success with people like you. There are no guarantees and they are not always successful, but if you want, you're free to try them. It might work." Many times in the intervening years I have thanked God for that man, a man who has had the courage to admit failure, a man who has had the humility to confess that all the hard-won learning of his profession could not turn up the answer. I looked up an AA meeting, and went there alone. Here I found the ingredient that had been lacking in in any other effort I had made to save myself. Here was power. Here was the power to live to the end of any given day, power to have courage, power to face the next day, power to have friends, power to help people, power to be sane, power to stay sober. That was 7 years ago and many AA meetings ago, and I haven't had a drink during those 7 years. Moreover, I am deeply convinced that so long as I continue to strive on my bumbling way toward the principles I first encountered in the early chapters of this book, this remarkable power will continue to flow through me. What is this power? With my AA friends, all I can say is that it's a power greater than myself. If pressed, all I can do is follow the psalmist who said it long before me. Be still and know that I am God. My story has a happy ending, but not of the conventional kind. I had a lot more hell to go through, but what a difference it has been going through this hell without a power. What a difference there is between going through hell without a power greater than oneself and with it. As might have been predicted, my teetering tower of worldly success collapsed. My alcoholic associates fired me, took control, ran the enterprise into bankruptcy. My alcoholic wife took up with someone else, divorced me, and took with her all my remaining property. The most terrible blow in my life befell me after I found sobriety through AA. Perhaps the single flicker of decency that had shone through the fog of my drinking days was a clumsy affection for my 2 children, a boy and a girl. One night my son, when he was only 16, was suddenly and tragically killed. The higher power was on deck to see me through sober. I think he's on hand to see my son through too. There have been some wonderful things too. My new wife and I don't own any property to speak of, and the flashy success of another day are no longer mine. But we have a baby who, if you'll pardon the little post-alcoholic sentimentality, is right out of heaven. My work is on a much deeper and more significant level than ever was before, and I am today a fairly creative, relatively sane human being, and I should have had more bad times. And should I have more bad times, I know that I'll never again have to go through it alone. Okay, that's it for today, folks. Thank you. Until next time, 1AA time, 1AA place, and 1AA channel.